And when you think about biological weapons, in fact, I mean, there's no way, even if you decided to target a country, that you could keep it within that country. Some people are going to escape over the border. They're going to get into Canada, and Canada's going to get into Europe. And somebody in Canada, lots of Chinese, are going to get back to China. So China really needs to rethink this very evil strategy because it would blow back upon them. It spreads so rapidly in China because of the cover-up. I mean, if they had alerted people immediately that there was a danger out there, to be very careful and not to get contaminated, you might have stopped it. But because of the cover-up,
they incentivize you get in trouble if you report, so why report?
That's right. And everybody then starts to spread it around. And once it starts to spread ubiquitously, there's very little that you can do to contain it, especially when the death rate is significant, as I think it is here.
I wanted to get Joel Skousen, former Marine Corps aviator, officer, the editor of worldafairsbrief.com, on about this. Charles Murray, we're living in post-America, moved to a small town to survive the collapse. I agree that culturally, long-term, just being prosperous and having this much freedom makes you decadent and you fall apart. But I wanted to get his take on the short term about that and what he thinks we can do politically to try to continue with this big push of nationalism and populism and Brexit and the rest of the things we've seen. But separately, I know he's really informed about the safest places to live in the United States. And of course, we sell his book, Strategic Relocation. We produced a documentary that we still have available, Strategic Relocation, the film. Those are available at InfoWarsStore.com, but that's a side issue. This is a really hot topic now, and it's back in the news everywhere. And a lot of the big money's been moving out to rural areas or out of the U.S. for a long time. Why does he think that's happening? But separately, the coronavirus, Trump's praise of Xi Jinping, which I don't like, all the things that are happening right now. Is this being used as a pretext for control by the communists? What do you really think's happening with the coronavirus? Then we'll get into what you see happening with politics and so much more. WorldAffairsBrief.com. Thanks for joining us, Joel.
Thank you, Alex. Good to be with you. Well, the reason that China started arresting people who talked about the coronavirus during its initial outbreak was that this was a weaponized virus coming right out of the Bio4 laboratory in Wuhan, and it escaped, basically. Now, in last week's World Affairs Brief, I covered the Jeff Nyquist article about the Chinese general who over a decade ago said that the Chinese were trying to develop biological weapons to depopulate the United States so that they could gain more living space and take control of the country without destroying the infrastructure. And so clearly, they're developing bioweapons to use against America for depopulation purposes, but it backfired on them. It leaked out. Lancet magazine said it probably happened because of all the disposable gloves. They throw away the garbage, and the Chinese are real garbage strippers. They probably collected a lot of those gloves, distributed or sold them to the fish market, and that's why it apparently started in the fish market. But the Chinese arrested, for example, the first doctor who blew the whistle on it, and they kept him enough in prison without treatment that he died. The treatment was too late, so that he was a victim. And I think the Chinese are still covering up for the amount and number of cases that are being reported. I also covered last week in the World Affairs Brief the Zero Hedge article showing that the official statistics coming out of China were fudged, and occasionally would pop up the true statistic, 24,000 deaths, 154,000 cases. And we find out that crematoriums are busy just cremating bodies to get rid of the bodies.
Mobile cremation vans. I mean, clearly, those are real ghost cities. All hell's breaking loose.
Yes, it is. And so I think, as I wrote in the World Affairs Brief, I said, I don't think the Lord is going to allow this nation to be completely destroyed with the Chinese virus. And I'm hopeful that
no weapon formed against us shall prosper. So even though we're evil and everything, our prayers are still being heard. The enemy built a weapon that blew back against them.
Yeah, I think this is blowback, and hopefully this will cause the Chinese to think twice. And when you think about biological weapons, in fact, I mean, there's no way, even if you decided to target a country, that you could keep it within that country. Some people are going to escape over the border. they're going to get into Canada, and Canada's going to get into Europe, and somebody in Canada, lots of Chinese, they're going to get back to China. So China really needs to rethink this very evil strategy because it would blow back upon them. We're finding that it's not that much of a threat to the United States yet because everyone is in quarantine who comes in from China, and people who are getting the virus are put into immediate medical treatment, and it is recoverable. This is not an absolute deadly plague.
Why does China continue? The last 4 times SARS got out, it was them. Why can't they contain the stuff there? I mean, they shouldn't be building it anyways, but why does it keep getting out?
Well, it keeps getting out, as I say, probably because of improper disposal procedures of their suits and their gloves from this weapons laboratory.
They
But
should
it
be
also
burning
spreads.
it.
That's right, and it spreads so rapidly in China because of the cover-up. I mean, if they had alerted people immediately that there was a danger out there, to be very careful and not to get contaminated, you might have stopped it. But because
But
of
they
the cover-up,
incentivize you get in trouble if you report, so why report?
that's right, and everybody then starts to spread it around. And once it starts to spread ubiquitously, there's very little that you can do to contain it, especially when the death rate is significant, as I think it is here.
So you're a smart guy. How do you predict this ends up unfolding?
Well, I think it's going to cause mayhem in China. I don't think it's going to end up overthrowing the government, but I'll tell you, I think God is interested in making the Chinese pay a big price for having done this. And so I see this continuing to spread. I don't see any containment possible right now. There's a lot of junk information on there about showing Xi Jinping getting his temperature taken and being and I'm very disappointed too that Trump is complimenting Beijing. The United States should be blowing the whistle very strongly about Chinese cover-up of this virus and how this has been a danger. They should be blowing the whistle. The United States intelligence knows this is a weaponized virus. They've had experts testify that this is not just in the wild mutation that the Chinese are talking about. This is weaponized as a virus. The Chinese ought to be held accountable for it. Fortunately, I think it's going to really hurt the Chinese economy because I think trade is going to be essentially cut off for a long time. People are not going to be able to go back and forth to China for maybe a year.
Well, sure. Look, I'm not a conspiracy theorist like the media says, but I do look at coincidences. And I know Trump can't even do an anti-corruption call to Ukraine. He's not in control of the government. I don't think Trump's behind this. And I know the globalists that run our country